Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Francisco Melo. I'm from SPI Portugal, and I'm the organizer of the Urban GreenUP webinars. This time, I'm glad to welcome you on our webinar focusing on floating gardens, our second external webinar, this time not exclusively organized by the Urban GreenUP project, but in coordination with our sisters SCC and BS projects of UNaLab and Connecting Nature, and we are very glad to have had the opportunity of co-organizing this with them and to be able to reaching out really to a really huge community focusing on nature-based solutions at European and international levels. So a few reminders for today's webinar. The webinar will be recorded, and both the video and the presentation of our speakers will be shared in the Urban GreenUP project channels afterwards. So for those that could not attend, even though registering for the webinar, they will be able to find this on our channels. For today, we will have a brief introduction from our project coordinator about the Urban GreenUP project, Mr. Raul Sanchez from Cartives Technology Center. And then we will be going immediately to our first speaker of the afternoon, Juliet Staples from the Liverpool City Council, that will be focusing on a presentation on Liverpool's floating ecosystems. And then going across the pond to Chicago and to Nick Wesley, that will be presenting city immersive floating eco parks and speaking about specific project of the Chicago Wild Mile, a really state-of-the-art solution when it comes to floating ecosystems. So really looking forward to these two presentations. And then we will be closing our discussion with some Q&A, opening the floor to all the participants that want to know more about the presentation of our speakers, about the project, about nature-based solutions at European level. We will be very glad to provide the clarifications we can. So with no further delays, I will pass the word to our project coordinator, Raul Sanchez, allowing him to share the screen. Raul, I'll pass the word to you right now. You're able to share your screen, and please switch on your camera as well.
Hello, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. Can you see my screen?
We can see. Please use presentation mode and go ahead with it.
Oh, yes, sorry. Yeah. Now I think that now is working. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Many thanks, Julio and Francisco, for your kind introduction. It's a pleasure for me to have the opportunity again in this second external webinar, the opportunity to share with all of you the overall view of the Urban GreenUP project. So thank you very much for attending this webinar. We are going to share greening and renaturing experiences related to floating gardens and floating system from Chicago and Liverpool. And I would like to thank, of course, to our friends project, UNaLab and Connecting Nature, for helping us with the webinar. So I would like to introduce the main the main aspects of the project. The project belongs to the Horizon 2020 program, specifically to the work program during the years, including the years 2016 and 2017, and related to the topic about demonstrating innovative nature-based solutions. The project started in the 1st of June of 2017, and it is foreseen that the project finish in May in 2022. The project has a budget around 15 million euros, with a European Commission contribution around 14 million euros. The consortium has 25 partners, including municipalities, RTDs, technology centers, universities, large industries, SMEs, non-profit organizations, and public bodies. And we have included in our project 9 different nationalities: Spanish, English, Turkish, German, Italian, Portuguese, Chinese, Vietnamese, and Colombian partners. Yeah. In this slide, we can see the worldwide dimension of the project, with 3 front-runner cities as demo sites: Valladolid in Spain, Liverpool in the UK, and Izmir in Turkey. We have also 5 follower cities, 2 European follower cities, Ludwigsburg in Germany and Mantova in Italy. And we also have 3 non-European follower cities: Medellin in Colombia, Chengdu in China, and Binh Dinh Quy Nhon in Vietnam. The main aspect of the project is that the Urban GreenUP pretends to demonstrate an innovative methodology to renaturing cities, incorporating a new concept, the renaturing urban plan concept, working with nature-based solutions. We are going to implement many nature-based solutions. And we have also taken into account new technologies in order to fight against the climate change. This is the main idea of the project. And for this, we need to identify the city challenges. We need also to involve the main stakeholders related to the MBA's chain. I mean that we need to involve industry partners, SMEs, startups, entrepreneurs, citizens, authorities, local authorities, regional authorities, and a wide range of authorities. We are going to demonstrate at larger scale the MBA's implementation in 3 demo sites, as I mentioned before: Valladolid, Liverpool, and Izmir. And it's necessary to evaluate and replicate the outcomes and the results of the project at the European level, but also we are going to replicate it an international level. And we are going to work around an interdisciplinary approach, and we are also involving social science and humanities, trying the main aspect of the project in a collaborative processes. Okay, regarding the nature-based solutions to be implemented in the project, it is foreseen to implement more than 100 of nature-based solutions among the 3 front-runner cities. We are going to implement many green infrastructure. I mean that we are going to implement green roofs, green walls, green facades, vertical garden, sustainable urban drainage systems, urban forests, of course, floating garden. This is the topic for today. We are also going to implement green shelters, smart soils, green corridors, pollinators, modules, and many educational actions around nature-based solutions. We have named these activities, this action, as non-technical action. The project actions will be implemented in different sub-demo areas in each front-runner cities. And the main feature of this implementation is the interconnection among these sub-demo areas, and of course the interconnection among the nature-based solutions. And we have identified we have categorized the nature-based solutions in 4 overall categories. We have renaturing urbanization nature-based solutions, water interventions, singular green infrastructure, and non-technical interventions. And I would like also to emphasize the main impacts of the project. The idea is to generate a new global MBA's market in order to create, also to generate new economic opportunities in Europe around products and local green jobs. We have foreseen to generate 500 direct jobs, around 500 direct jobs. We want to increase the awareness of the benefits of renaturing cities. We want to enhance stakeholders and citizens' participation. I mean that we want to generate to create processes to co-design, to co-develop, and to co-implement nature-based solutions. We want to foster the creation by 2020. Now it's not right to mention 2020. Because we need to work beyond 2020, but we want to foster the creation a healthier and greener cities. We want to increase the international cooperation, of course, and we want to implement European environmental policies. We want to improve living conditions and biodiversity in order to make our cities more livable spaces. And we would like to mention also that our cluster of cities is really active. We have achieved the commitment currently, the commitment of 21 cities, and we are very happy with this activity. This is I would like to show at least the name of the cities included in our cluster of cities. And we are very happy with this activity. We are trying to increase the promotion and the activities of the cluster. And to finish, I would like to thank especially to our speaker today, Juliet Staples from the Liverpool City Council. And you know that Liverpool is a front-runner city in the Urban GreenUP project. And also to special thanks to Nick Wesley from the Urban Rivers in Chicago. Thank you very much for participating in our webinar. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much. And yeah, and it's your turn again, Francisco. So I'm going to switch off my camera and my micro. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Raul, for your quick presentation of the project and also about the Urban GreenUp cluster of cities. We will be happy to provide any further details if needed, depending on whether you are a company, a city, a public authority, research center. Anyway, we will be here to provide you any further information that you want. With no further delays, I will be going to our first speaker, Juliet Staples. Let me take the opportunity to introduce Juliet very briefly. So Juliet is the lead Liverpool Council Officer for Environment and Green Space Strategy and Development. She has over 25 years experience in the environmental sector and has a particular interest and specialism in climate change, adaptation, resilience, and ecosystem management. She has a bachelor degree in zoology from the Liverpool University, a master's degree in pollution and environmental control from Manchester University, and a PhD in ecosystem management in navigated waters from Liverpool University. She is currently leading the Liverpool's delivery of the Horizon 2020 project, Urban GreenUp, and we are, of course, very glad to have the opportunity of having Juliet as a speaker today. Juliet, I ask you to please switch on your camera, also your microphone, and I'll be allowing you to present now as well. So please go ahead.
Okay, I'm just waiting for the presentation opportunity. Bear with me. Could you remind me where it is? It's not come up on the screen.
Okay. Oh, there you go.
Thank you. Can I confirm that that's showing?
Yeah, it's showing. If you want, please switch on your camera as well. And please go ahead.
Is my camera on as well?
Not yet.
Okay, so from the beginning. Bear with me, sorry.
No problem.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we do.
Okay. All right. First of all, thank you for that, Francisco. Sorry for the small technical issues there. First of all, welcome everyone to Liverpool, where it is a sunny day and it's not raining. My name's Dr. Juliet Staples. I work for Liverpool City Council and I'm part of the Urban GreenUp project. I'm senior manager for the Liverpool team. So I'm going to tell you a little bit today about one of the aspects of the work that we're doing, which is the floating ecosystems. Now, Raul has already talked to you a little bit about the Horizon 2020 funding. He's explained that the amount of money that we've got, and Liverpool, as a lead front-runner city in that project, has about €4 million to deliver a number of different types of nature-based solutions. So the Liverpool Partnership, the team that are working with that funding to deliver the project, comprise of the City Council, which is where I work, together with the University of Liverpool. So we have some strong academic challenge and credibility as part of the project. And the Mersey Forest, who are a community forest trust in the northwest in the Liverpool region. And they have been pioneers of some of the green infrastructure interventions for a couple of decades. So they've got a lot of experience. The project started, as Raoul said, back in 2017 and will run through till May 2022. And we're looking at a whole range of different nature-based solutions. So they include things like green walls, sustainable tree urban drainage systems, different types of pollinator planting, etc., etc. But today I'm going to be talking about 2 floating ecosystems that we're delivering. The first is a saltwater ecosystem that is in the city docks, and the second is a freshwater ecosystem that's actually in a park lake. So the first one here is the saltwater floating ecosystem in Wapping Dock, and this is taken on the day it went in, and it was in June 2020. And if you look carefully at the water, you can see it actually was raining, but that's how it looked when it went in. So I'll tell you a little bit about how we got to that picture there. So a couple of things to consider when we wanted to put our island in. The first really important one was about the location. So we knew roughly where it wanted to go, and that picture in the top there gives an outline indication of what we envisaged. But we knew that it was an urban heritage dock area, and so we needed to give that some consideration. And on that top picture, you'll see there's not an awful lot of green space, and the little bit that you can see is actually earmarked for future development. So it's quite an urban and grey environment in which that island was planning to go. Also, we do have a working navigable channel through that dock, so we couldn't place the island anywhere too close to that or interfere with traffic of boats, etc. We know that the site has multiple water users. There's lots of keen canoeists and open water swimmers, so we wanted to be sure that the island wouldn't interfere with using the water. I also wanted the island to be fairly sheltered and accessible, and there's always a balance about that. We didn't want it out where it was going to get a lot of strong winds or turbulence from boats, but I didn't want it too close to the shore because I didn't want people to feel that they could swim to or something they could, try and get to by boat or themselves, etc. And then also we needed to think about how it looked. So it's quite a key area of the city. We wanted it to look good, and I wanted it also importantly to be visible because it will also indicate the start of the city's green corridor routes as well. So these were all the considerations around where we actually put the island, as well as practical issues such as the depth and things like that. When it came to the design, we had a number of other things that we needed to also consider. The area is exposed estuarine habitat, so we know that they'll be subject to some tidal fluctuations and some other issues, such as harsher growing environments for plants, etc. In turn, that maybe restricted some of the types of pollinated planting that we'd be able to include. I wanted, if possible, to include some vegetation height, so it wasn't just a bed of like floating grass. I wanted it to have a structure and an attractiveness with it as well. We also talked about having an open water habitat within the island, and you can see that as an opportunity for underwater life, animals in layers of the habitat, for example, where that was possible. We also wanted an underwater reef structure, something that would add an underwater element for biodiversity. And importantly, because although the City Council owns the land, we don't actually own the water. We needed to work closely with the Canal and Rivers Trust, who own that piece of land as well, and make sure that they were on board with what we wanted to do. So the island itself here, this is the big island being put together. It was actually assembled in the docks during lockdown. You can see there that some of the construction materials that were used, it's predominantly recycled materials, non-toxic materials, and they've got coconut coir edging on the island. So it was assembled in the docks, and then it was quite exciting actually when it was towed to location. It was quite good to watch that happening. So in terms of our island structure, because we're looking at a research and innovation project, we were keen to test out things both above and below the water. So above the water, we've got a number of what we call high buoyancy planters, and these are able to give a little bit of height to the island, and we can use them to plant taller plants or very large shrubs, but they tend to be supported by additional buoyancy underneath. Although most of the planting is estuarine or salt tolerant reeds and grasses, we do have some pollinators and some flowers in there as well, so it's not just all green, there's colour. One of the other elements we tested out as well was a rainwater catchment planter. So if you look at that picture there, you can see that there's like a wooden shallow tray that's embedded on the surface of the island. and that's lined so that the rainwater is effectively caught and held there, and that allows us to include species that are not as tolerant to 100% seawater. So we're able to increase the diversity through the types of plants that we can put on there. And then you can see that the plants are planted in a lightweight leca, and this is stands for lightweight expanded clay aggregate. And it's like, for those of you that might know the sweets Maltesers, it's like a Malteser but without the chocolate. They're little circles, and they've got lots and lots of tiny little drainage holes in them, so they're very good at draining water, and they're used quite a lot in the construction industry. So they were the design features above the water. Below the water, we worked with colleagues, Biomatrix, who helped us design and build the island, and BioHut has gone in there. So we've got some oyster-filled cages underneath the island to provide interstitial spaces for underwater life. And we also tested a submerged shingle shelf there below the island, and that was really to see whether we could see small fish foraging and to see what kind of wildlife and what kind of colonization might take place on something like that. And they were the main design features below the water. Oh, sorry. Say three, bear with me, previous. So 3 months later, as you can see, when we came back in September to do the first maintenance visit, the 3 pictures at the top show pretty much what the island looked like then. So some really good growth, and we had a particularly hot, dry spring as well. So the island had stood the test pretty well. And then under the water, we were just amazed, really. I'm not sure why we were quite so amazed, but I'd forgotten how quickly things do colonize under the water. So in very little time at all, we've got a whole array of different seaweeds, sponges, we've got lots of small fish and jellyfish, and the island is very much acting as a magnet for the wildlife and for the underwater life in that dock. So to summarize, the Wapping Dock island, it's about 63 meters square. As I said before, it's made from recyclable non-materials. We've got a whole range of plants on there, and we are looking really much to improve the biodiversity area and to replicate the kind of habitats that we would see naturally occurring in an estuarine environment. And the benefits associated with the island for us and for the project, well, we're hoping that this will be improved contact for people with nature. You remember that the picture showed there's not an awful lot of other nature or natural spaces other than the water in that area. We think it will enhance the environment. Obviously, it does provide new habitat, and we know it has attracted wildlife. We think it has also possibly increased biodiversity. In terms of strengthening fish stocks or maybe improving water quality, we think it will have benefits in this area, but we're not actually testing or monitoring for those. We're almost certain it will encourage investment. The area is out for development around it, and we think the island will be a focal point and something to build from and on. And importantly for us, it acts as a route marker. So we have 3 green corridors in the city with this project. It effectively marks the start of the fish close to the city centre. And importantly for the City Council, like many others, we signed a climate change declaration. And this is something very visible and very tangible that we can point to in terms of the sorts of things we're trying to do to deliver on our declaration, and also promote discussion and awareness with residents and communities as well. So our second island, our sister island, is a freshwater floating ecosystem, and this is based in a city park. Sorry, it's being a little bit slow. There you go. So the same considerations again for the island and the park. So this is quite a different site. So if you remember that first picture for the saltwater island, it was in a very urban environment. And you can see from the picture here that we're placing our island into a very green environment already. And also it's much smaller island, and it's in fresh water. So there's lots of differences really. So in terms of the location, it's quite hard to see, but if you look more or less in the middle of that picture at the top, you can probably see a lime green squashed diamond oval shape, and that is where the island is going, or where it has gone. We needed a site that was quite secluded. We needed to think about putting something like this into a park that was already an award-winning park and was well used and has a green flag, so we couldn't detract from the site. We had similar considerations about shelter versus accessibility. We didn't want people to feel it was something that they could get out to or climb on for all sorts of reasons, including safety. I also needed it to add to the park. It needed to bring something different. It needed to be aesthetic, look good. I also wanted people to know it was there. So in terms of the I said before, this is much smaller, much simpler, and obviously much cheaper as well. The focuses really here were about pollination and biodiversity. So although we originally thought about putting in more of a monoculture about reeds, in the end we thought it'd be more interesting to put in a mix of reeds, plants, grasses and pollinators, and to look at the biodiversity that we could also bring to the park. And you might see from that top picture that whilst we have quite a lot of water in the lake and the other water bodies in that park, some of the edges are hard surface, so that we don't actually have the opportunity for emergent vegetation. So this was actually bringing in a new type of habitat as well. And importantly, this smaller, cheaper island was actually going to be a little bit more of a working island, because apart from just delivering biodiversity, we're also looking to improve water quality. So the idea here was that we would place that island in that specific location there, because that is where a tributary comes into the lake that has a very high nutrient loading in the water. And the hope was that by placing the island here, the roots that dangle through the island that you can see on the image will help to take up some of those nutrients. And the island, by its very being there, will help to shade out some of the sunlight. And by removing both the energy from the sun and by taking up the nutrients from the roots, we were hoping that we could in effect remove some of those nutrients and possibly prevent or reduce the likelihood of blue-green algal blooms later in the year. So the island's doing a couple of features here. It's providing biodiversity and habitat, but it's also, we're hoping it will improve water quality. One of the other things its design was, we wanted to deter nuisance species. I didn't want a goose coming along and eating everything on it before it got established. So we do have some bird nets around. We have used some features such as planting water mint around the edges, often can discourage geese from wanting to use the island. And again, it was really important that it was supported by the park, and there's a very active friends group. So here we are planting and installing the island. We were able to do this socially distanced. And you can see here that the island is constructed of like coir rolls, and the plants are basically just pushed between the gaps of the coir rolls. It was pushed into the island. I'm stood on it there, so you can see it's quite sturdy. It joints together, and we were able to, well, not we, Galen from the company Biomatrix was able to actually canoe out and tow the island into place. So here we are. So it's a surface area of about 25 meters squared. Again, it's from recycled materials, planted with a range of reeds, grasses and plants, providing habitat, pollination, a new environment, and also hopefully improving water quality. And those benefits are listed there. And we have the addition here that we've been able to have direct community engagement in this project, along with the university who are undertaking research. It's far more accessible. And interestingly, the same issues about promoting climate change in the discussion point, but we have been able to inspire a new project in the park as a result of this, and I'll talk about that later. So the lessons learned and feedback to date. So in general, Biomatrix, the company Water Solutions, Biomatrix Water Solutions, led this for us. They won it through direct open tender. And although this floating island would be one of the hardest projects to deliver technically, it was actually a lot easier than we initially feared. So that was a relief. And then interestingly as well, I talk about the island and we talked about floating gardens, but the terminology I try very hard to use is that of ecosystem. And this was following discussions, because when I think about it, it's more than just an island or a garden. It is a whole ecosystem, both above and often below the water as well. And I think ecosystem better conveys the multiple benefits that we get from the island. We are monitoring data from both islands and it is being collated. I'm just sorry that I haven't been able to, or I won't be able to share any data with you at the moment, because of the COVID lockdown, some of our data is still to be analysed, and the universities and the labs are still locked. So we haven't got all the data that we'd like, but hopefully it won't be too long and we'll be able to publish some information on how they've worked. So the lessons on each of the islands specifically. So for the saltwater system at Wapping Dock, the project was really well received, but we did have one objection. There was one resident who overlooked the docks who didn't like the idea of having the island there. And I think they were concerned about it setting a precedent and being the route for further development, which wasn't the case. So we've agreed to a 2-year trial and we will review it after the 2 years. And we haven't had any complaints since the island went in June. We did have some staff changes, both at the local college and at the Canal and River Trust, and they did impact on the project a little. So we had at the beginning that a student at the local college would be able to get involved and help with some of the design, but the teacher that was leading on that left the college and we were unable to pick up that thread again. And then the lead Canal and River Trust officer left during the first wave of COVID lockdown. So for a while, we didn't have a direct contact. When we were planning it, the dock is in a heritage area, but we didn't need planning permission, and we were able to agree the heritage issues with direct conversations between the City Council staff and the Canal Trust staff. We also undertook phased planting, which worked really well for us, certainly with the lockdown issues as well. It meant that we could get the island out with some plants on it, and then we could go back in September, and on that maintenance visit, we could do some additional planting. We had really good media promotion, and the island is actually, it's a bit of a UK and possibly a global first in some respects. So we've had lots of inquiries as far as there, Seattle, Romania and Australia. So Biomatrix will be quite busy, I think. COVID-19 did affect us. I've tried not to talk about it too much. But when we got our new Canal and Rivers Trust officer in, the original agreement was deemed to be inappropriate, not suitable. And so we've had to go now with a proper license, which has incurred costs for us. And also I will need to think very carefully about the ongoing maintenance of the island and the exit strategy, because I would like it to remain there, obviously, for longer than 2 years. And we're looking at things now such as sponsorship to try and ensure the legacy, because the island will only really come into its own from a biodiversity perspective in subsequent years. And I think the other thing, it's the same with a lot of things. Second time around, when you replicate something, you find areas where you could maybe cut corners or shave costs. And I think if we did it again, talking to Biomatrix, because this was very much a first, we now know where we could possibly some of those costs. One of the things we are looking to do on the saltwater system here is to actually add in an additional feature on the next visit. We're hoping to put in an additional hanging column in the water with soft fronds to look at how that affects fish in terms of sheltering from predation, etc. So it's an ongoing and developing project, really, that one. From the freshwater ecosystem, I've said it's smaller, it's got less visual impact, but it's actually incredibly well loved, and it has been adopted and monitored by the Friends of the Park. It often features on their Twitter account, and we see photographs of a whole range of visitors, from terrapins and herons and nesting coots, etc. So it's been really well received. We managed to get some promotional footage out again, even though it was during lockdown, and that went down really well. And I talked before that it's actually inspired another project. And when the island went in, one of the retail operators within the park was so engrossed and engaged and loved the island that he wanted to do something else for the park. And so now we're talking about him sponsoring a possible leaky dam on one of the tributaries into the lake as well. So that would never have happened without the island going in as it did. And of course, the island is also providing a really useful, cost-effective trial for some of our other lakes in the city where we've got water quality issues. So if it works as well as we hope, it's something we can replicate and a sustainable way to manage some of those other lakes in the future. So that's Liverpool's floating ecosystems. So I've put the website on there, and I've got my email on there as well. So obviously I'm happy to take questions after this, but if anyone wanted to email me after, then that's great as well. So thank you for listening, and back to you now, Francisco.
Thank you very much, Juliet. Thank you for your great presentation. I know we already have some questions, especially from Heather Brooks, but we will leave this to the Q&A part after Nick Wesley presentation. Please take note of your questions to Juliet. Now going straight to the next presentation, City Immersive Floating Eco Parks, the Chicago Wild Mile. It will be presented by Nick Wesley. Nick is the co-founder of Urban Rivers, with an emphasis on community, urban planning, and technology. Nick has brought together a diverse group of stakeholders on a shared vision for Chicago City waterways. Nick holds a BBA in entrepreneurship from the Wilkes University. We are very happy to have Nick among us. Nick, I'm making you presenter now, and I hope everybody enjoys your presentation. We are very excited to be having the opportunity of listening to you. Please connect your camera, connect your mic, and go ahead with it. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, yeah. And then let me see how do I, there we go, show my screen. That does it. Okay. Let me know if you can see.
We do, Nick, thank you.
Oh, okay, great. Move this out of the way. Cool. Yeah, so thank you guys. I'm Nick Wesley, co-founder of Urban Rivers, and thank you, Juliet, for that. It's fantastic to see how these things are evolving throughout the world. So I hope that I can add a little flavor to it as well. So, you know, we kind of start with a question on what should a river be? You know, is it a place for community to congregate? Is it an economic driver of a city? Is it a bastion of wildlife habitat within an urban environment? So, you know, that's kind of a starting point on how we like to approach, you know, what we can do with our rivers. And, you know, I'm going to be talking about the Chicago River, but it's really kind of a stand-in for many different urban waterways. Lots of them have the exact same situations in different degrees and different flavors, but in reality, almost all, if not all, urban rivers are in a poor condition of some sort. They have some issues that can be improved upon. So, you know, when we look at the balance in the city, you have the city's residents who live there, the occupants of sorts. You have the built environment, so the buildings, the roads, all the infrastructure, and then you have the natural world. And in most urban places, it's pretty out of balance. You have a lot of people, a lot of infrastructure, but the pockets of nature are just kind of, in some cases, an afterthought, but more or less just on the periphery. So, you know, part of this is how can you increase the natural habitat or natural ecosystem within a city, and rivers are a perfect place to do that. So if we look at some of the history of the Chicago River, and again, this is a stand-in for many, we really, you know, it's a vital economic driver for the city, or it was, and really led to the development of Chicago becoming what it is today. And throughout that process, we basically took every single natural facet of this river and changed it to suit it for our needs at the time. So that included straightening it, widening it, dredging the bottom to make it deeper, so removing any of that natural kind of bottom condition, adding steel sheet pile so that it didn't have those natural slopes and it was just a kind of a tunnel. And so this image right here is of the river, basically the effort to get that one little turn out of it. So we dug this whole kind of canal to straighten it out, and basically, yeah, just to get every little curve that we could away from it. And at the time, it made some sense. I mean, there was a lot of boat traffic. This was taken, I believe, in the 1910s or so. And it shows like this was a really occupied river. It was really used to move goods throughout there, and that really helped us. But, you know, as with many places, we started to use more highways and trains and things like that. The river became less of an economic driver for transportation specifically. In addition, we have a big issue with pollution, and basically we use the river as a way to handle our waste. So Chicago famously reversed the Chicago River, basically by, you know, they dumped so much waste into it, it would go into the lake, and then the lake's where we got our drinking water. So what we decided to do was manufacture this Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal that would attach to the Des Plaines River, which moves to the Mississippi River, and then eventually to the Gulf of Mexico. So when we dump our sewage into the water, it doesn't necessarily affect Lake Michigan, but instead affects everybody else who's, I guess, south of us. You know, and this view of the river, that view that we kind of can conquer it and use it, just kind of abuse it, started to change in the 1970s. So we had the Tunnel and Reservoir Plan, or TARP, which is just an enormously large infrastructure project that has been seemingly being built forever, but the scale of it's pretty fantastic. Basically, it's a way that we can store wastewater before we dump it into the river to clean it up. So this is kind of the beginning of the thought process of taking the river and cleaning the waterways and making it more hospitable to wildlife as well as to our enjoyment. So it's not just a cesspool. Now, zooming into our project specifically, this is the canal that we are in. So it's on the east side of Goose Island, the North Branch Canal, and it's an artificial thing that was dug in the 1850s. And so, you know, one of the things that it frees us with is the idea of bringing this entirely back to nature. Really, this canal didn't exist, and we wanted to bring it into the original state. We would, you know, fill it in, but you know, we use that as kind of a, I guess, fuel that we want to then rethink on how we put these things in, how they work within a city, and take the environment that's there and use it as a tool to then create a more natural ecosystem within the river. So, you know, even with all the work on TARP and stuff, we still have a lot of issues. We still dump sewage in the water sometimes. Now, I will say this is not sewage. This is actually like copper or something else from a pipe. So just to preface that for clarity, but we do still dump sewage in the water from time to time. We do still have issues with flooding. Water levels rise pretty high. This was taken early in the pandemic, and you can see ducks kind of on this this sidewalk that's underwater. You can see the tip of our garden right there. And normally this garden, there's like 8 feet of seawall, so it was pretty interesting that it was so so high. There's another photo of it later on that day where it kind of lowered down a foot or two. But yeah, so you could see a lot of jumping around. You could see a lot of issues with flooding and things like that. So, you know, our solution to this is to put these floating gardens in, to add these kind of habitat structures that will increase the biodiversity in the area, increase the aesthetics, as well as work on things like water quality and stuff. So I'll zoom forwards. It's, you know, same issues with in most cities, a lot of stormwater and agriculture runoff and stuff is nutrifying the rivers, and it really creates a condition which isn't the greatest. So, you know, flash forwards, this is the canal that we're working in. This is what it used to look like, and what you know, basically the condition that we had. So you could see most of the landscaping is all on the land part. There's nothing in the water. It's basically this empty channel, and this is the edge condition of both our river, but a lot of other rivers. And you know, we really thought, okay, how can we change this? What can we do? How can we make it simple but multifunctional? And that's where we installed these floating gardens. So this was done, taken I think a year after we installed the next summer. But yeah, you could see how quickly they kind of green that edge, and they create this somewhat natural, or this natural system, but emulate the natural edge condition that you might normally get of a regular healthy river. And so the garden was kind of the first step, is how can we create this? Does it work? Do fish use it? And you know, that's where we kind of usher in the broader vision, which is the Wild Mile. And so also please ignore these dates, they're off. So yeah, but this is the Wild Mile, the vision of it. Now, you know, kind of how we got started in this. This is one of the other co-founders, Josh Yellen, and basically he put this 5 foot by 10 foot raft in as part of his thesis project to see how it would affect fish habitat. So he moored it to the edge, he set some fish traps and really counted how many were underneath this module versus underneath a dock or in open water. And he was able to find that there was a statistically significant amount more fish underneath this dock than underneath this floating garden than underneath the controls. And that showed the potential for how this can affect habitat. And, you know, we really wanted to see that, okay, how can we expand this out? How can we really create this as a piece of the ecosystem and really make this kind of the bastion of wildlife? So in 2017, we did a Kickstarter, and in addition with some grants, we're able to fund to put this first garden in. So this is pretty soon after we installed, probably a couple weeks after we installed, maybe a little longer, maybe a month or two. But either way, right, pretty soon after we installed, and you can see it's similar to what Juliet was showing of the how the gardens look at the pond. So it's this same supplier of gardens, and you can see you know the rows here, and she kind of went into it. It's these coconut coir mats. The plants grow right through. The roots hang underneath the water and create the habitat. But you can see from 1 year to the next how quickly it fills out. So this is in 2018, this photo was taken, so a year after. So very, very quickly you see these things fill in and create this really, really rich environment, which I don't know, I think it's fantastic. And it highlights what this river is, you know, regardless of all of the effort that is done by the MWRD, which is, and these other groups who are cleaning the water, which is an immense amount of infrastructure changes and effort. You know, just adding a few of these gardens really showcases that this is a vibrant ecosystem. This is a living waterway rather than just a channel. So it really helps with the perception as well as the wildlife itself. So you can see this one river, this one picture on the left is underneath, and you can see all of these roots really fill out, and they have a lot of different bacteria and other organisms who grow on it pretty quickly out of the gate. And it really creates a lot of nice structure for fish to hide in, instead of being in, you know, the water quality is good enough for most fish to survive, which wasn't the case, you know, 30 years ago, but now it is. But it's a channel. It's kind of an empty corridor, which isn't really, you know, a fun place for fish to be. So they, you know, aren't there in super great numbers, but adding these things create this structure that they can use to their advantage. In addition, you know, wildlife in the river is just looking for anything to latch onto. So this is a log that was near our gardens. And you can, I believe this one was taken near our gardens. And you can see like they just glob on. So you'll see a ton of turtles, ton of birds and other things like that that are just looking for any tiny piece of land to be on. So, you know, we wanted to see this as a modular, incremental approach. So we didn't think that we had all the answers right away. We didn't want to do that. So we basically have set out little sections as different experiments. So we choose different plants, and we really see and measure how well they do from year to year, how well the plants survive, and kind of how well they look and create habitat. So each year we can add more pieces in and really change it out. So this, in order to get this thing in, that some of the requirements that had to happen is there's a lot of permits. The waterways are a very interesting and highly regulated place, especially in the States. In Chicago, there's a lot of different agencies you have to get approval from. So we had the Army Corps of Engineers, which oversees all like large infrastructure projects on the river. We had to get a permit from them. The Illinois Department, at the IDNR, Illinois Department of Natural Resources, as well. The IEPA, which is the Environmental Protection Agency here, and then the city's Department of Transportation. So we had to go through all of these agencies to really get this thing in. Took about 2 years before we were able to launch it, and once we got those permits, we launched the Kickstarter and added this in. But that really kind of, one of the hardest challenges was really getting through to them on what this is, and we crossed that barrier, and now it really opens up the conversation for more interesting phases. And this is the next phase that we're doing, which is the learning platform. So this is slated to be installed in June this year, is the target installation. And you can see we use these floating gardens as kind of the edge of attached to this floating walkway. So, we really wanted to make this, we had a great program, which I'll touch on in later for a second, where students from the British School, which is a elementary school right down the street, basically planted gardens. They learned about freshwater ecosystems throughout their semester, and it kind of culminated in them actually planting a garden and installing it in. And it was an extraordinarily successful effort, and we wanted to lower that barrier of entry because they were able to get all of the kids on the water in kayaks to install these and see how they went. But we wanted to make that easier so people from all different schools can kind of come down, congregate in this floating ecosystem, and learn about the wildlife within the river, as well as have a place where people could hang out and really enjoy this bounty that we have in our cities, these urban waterways. So you can see here is another rendering, and this is the actual design and how it should look scale to scale. But yeah, you can see these kind of pathways that move through, and they'll have furniture and other things like that, and people can really latch on and see this as a place to be. So in addition, it's more than just a park. It's really kind of a community center. So we want this to be a place where everybody can kind of congregate, everybody can learn about the river, and have the nature and the wildlife in the area be the focal point. So the thing that attracts some people to some parks is different amenities, different playgrounds and things like that. But what we see is a wildlife first approach, where if we create these ecosystems, then we create the destination. That's what people want to go see. So in addition, we are working on monitoring these things. So we have a couple different research studies going on, and we partner with a lot of different research institutions to basically make this a living laboratory. So this is a picture of a mesocosm experiment. So basically having river water in these tanks and monitoring root growth. In addition, we have people are doing studies on bats, so seeing how bats are in the area. They put these cool ultrasonic microphones and monitor, use that to count how many bats are in the area versus other control areas, which are different parks along the river and different areas, and able to see, we're able to see just from the kind of amount of native plants we have, amount of insects, we get a lot of bats, which is great to see. So there's a couple different things to test out, water quality as well. And really we want to see how this affects the river, quantify it in some way, and make this basically a place where researchers can work and see how these things affect the ecosystem and just study our urbanized water system in general. We're creating a destination, so a place where people can kayak to. We get a lot more access to the river now. There's a lot more docks being installed and ways that people can enter. So making this a kind of a destination and really promoting the idea of human-powered craft within the waterways and using the river as a resource. So,
Nick, can I please ask you to wrap it up in 4 minutes?
Oh yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
I could do quicker than that. So great. We've had great press with it. People in the city have really adopted it. We have really good volunteers. So part of this whole project is a community effort. So this year we had especially during the pandemic, we had about 160 rangers. So these are people who go out once a week to do different activities, and we were able to People really wanted to get out in the environment. We were able to set it up in a way where you had small groups of 2 to 4 people going out at staggered throughout the week, and it really, people really loved it. It was really an interesting time. So yeah, and I can wrap it up there, and we can go into Q&A because I think that'll be we'll get a lot of cool information from that. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Nick, for your presentation. I think that we had 2 really good presentations, and we are now going to the most expected Q&A session, where every one of our participants can put questions to our speakers. For you to do it yourselves, you will have to use the raise hand option, so we can unmute you and give you the word to put your questions. In the meanwhile, as we already had some people putting their questions to our speakers in written, I will just pass on to our speakers the questions we had so far. 2 of these questions we got from Heather Brooks. So Heather was asking Juliet specifically, why did you decide not to measure whether it improves the solutions, improve biodiversity or water quality? It was because of lack of time or lack of resources, or it was just not considered a priority? This would be the first question to Juliet. Also about Sefton Park Island, it is a community project, but she's asking if the funding came completely from the Liverpool City Council. And we have a further one from Nevelina, which asked Juliet, but I believe this would go to Juliet and to Nick as well, about the cost estimation per square meter of the floating gardens. So Juliet, I would go with you first, and then we'll go to Nick about this square meter cost. So Juliet, please.
Okay, thank you. So the first question was why we didn't measure things like the water quality in Wapping Dock. I think the reason we didn't is because the dock is huge. It's under tidal influence. I think the idea really was, the focus was on the biodiversity on that particular island. And yes, of course, we're going to be limited by resources, and we would need special etc. boat stingers to be able to get out into the water, and it wasn't a key focus of the project. It would have been nice to have done it. At Sefton Park, it's obviously a lot easier. It's a much smaller, more accessible environment, so we're able to get there and to look at how the island is working. The second question about Sefton Park, about involving the community. Yes, the money has all come via Urban GreenUP, the capital costs to put the island in. But what we do have is kind of a match in terms of time from the community group there. So the Sefton Park Friends of group, the park group, they are taking daily monitoring, they're taking regular photographs, they're posting on Twitter, they're sharing information, and they're actually participating in some of the biodiversity surveys as well. So they're engaging in a slightly different way, not necessarily monetary based. And the costs per meter squared, I can tell you that the big island cost about, and it was all, obviously it was in euros and it's all the exchange rates and things, about £70,000-ish, and the smaller island in Sefton Park was about £5,000-ish. So obviously the big one was quite expensive, but it was a first. There was a lot of development and innovation in that island, and it's in a much harsher environment, the salt water with the tidal fluctuations, etc. The smaller island, much cheaper. Obviously it's in a freshwater, more secluded area. That's really where I kind of said in the before, if we were to do it again, I think some of the things that we invested very heavily in, such as anchorage on the saltwater system to accommodate any tides or currents, etc., we played safe. And I think if we were to do it again now, we probably would say that we could cut some of those costs. I don't think it would be near as cheap as small island, but I think it probably wouldn't be quite that much. So I hope that answers those questions.
Yes, if any one of you feel that the question was not properly answered, please type down again or just come out and raise your hand. Nick, can I ask you for your comments regarding the the cost per square meter your island?
Yeah, so we and I'm not sure how accurate this is now. I don't know if it went up or down, but I think we estimated it's like $50 a square foot, which is square foot's like 10 meters, so like 500 USD a square meter. I think is like what we factored as cost of the installation, maintenance, and things like that as kind of a rule of thumb. But you know, it definitely varies. I think kind of what your experience was with 75,000 pounds for an install. That's about accurate for just kind of dipping the toe in the water. And as you scale up and down, that's one of the good things is you could just kind of do it depending on whatever your budget allows. And also add to it year after year, which is what we did. We had the first install in 2017, and each year we keep putting in more and more, and really trying to add more of these, and learning from some of the things we're doing. So that's kind of one cool aspect too.
Great, thank you, Nick. Please come out with further questions that you might have. Please use the raise hand icon if you want to put the question yourself, or just type it down in the question chat box. We have two further questions from Gerard Luxton and Mitchell Cluton. I hope I'm pronouncing the name well. The first one, and I believe that it's to both of our speakers, it's about to know how the floating wetlands respond to frozen water conditions. This one from Gerard Luxton, as I was saying before, and the other one, it's about the maintenance issue, because it seems that the plan is to let natural selection and colonization to take place. Mitchell is asking if this is the case, or in case it's not, how much ongoing maintenance cultivation is planned over the initial years of the project, the first 1 to 5 years. I would leave you, both of the speakers, with these questions. I would start with Nick now about the answers.
Yeah, so our canal doesn't freeze very often, although it did like a week ago. So, which was the first time since we've been doing this project that we had ice, and it turned out pretty good. There's nothing, no issues, no damage or anything like that. I'm sure in other areas and with if you have more kind of hostile conditions, it might be a little bit different. But for us, it didn't really affect it. The maintenance is an interesting question. There really is two ways you can go about it. You can kind of plant these perennials that will come back year after year and just let them go and see how it works. We do a little bit more of an active kind of maintenance, more or less because we are nearby. We're just trying to learn from it. So we have, at minimum, you need to do a few different weeding things each year. So 3 to 4 times where you go out and you pick out any invasives and things like that. And then the next year you want to do sometimes a replant, depending on how bad the weeding goes. And you also have things that happen. Like we had, we planted these floating trees, and we had beavers within like a week eat them all. And so you have things like that where there's geese get on and they might pick up new plants and things like that. So there's always that type of situation that you get into. But it's a really good volunteer opportunity. We have a lot of people. We have no shortage of people who want to do some of these things, which is helpful for us because we can really micromanage it in a way that we probably wouldn't if we just had to do it with staff. But yeah,
right,
it's not too hard.
Thank you, Juliet. Can we have your take on this?
Hello. Yes, I'm just trying to put my camera back on. Yeah, in terms of the floating wetlands, although it has a reputation for being very cold and rainy, we haven't the docks haven't frozen at any time that I can remember. So So we've not had to deal with frozen waterways. We have had to deal with severe storms, weather warnings, very blustery conditions, and they've not budged an inch. So they have been good, and it was wise to invest in that strong anchorage, I guess. So I can't report on the frozen conditions, but it's good to hear what Nick said. Actually, I'm kind of thinking, well, if we did get something really severe, the fact that they've survived there kind of indicates to me, same manufacturer, similar design, we're probably going to be okay. So I'm not losing sleep about that at the moment. In terms of the maintenance issue, yeah, we have a maintenance program on ours. So the contractors at the moment come back three times a year. They look at the planting. As Nick said, they'll do some removal of maybe some invasive species to help get the right kind of plant mix established. They'll also do maintenance of the hardware. So they'll check the pivot points and the anchor systems and all that kind of stuff, because we're in a saltwater system, so these things foul up quite quickly. So they'll keep on top of that for us. Going forward, I think there's an opportunity, depending on how we get sponsorship maybe for the island in the future, as to how that's managed. I'd like to think that it's there as a biodiversity feature, and that we do manage it in that way going forward. But then I think, because we have to remember, in England, unfortunately, our climate is not always as warm and as sunny as some of the other climates. I think the actual growth to get to that point will probably take longer. I love the pictures that Nick showed. Well, this is the following year, and I'm thinking we might have to wait 3 or 4 years maybe in England to have a similar impact, possibly, because the climate's not always as generous. But yeah, going forward, I think we can manage it. We can let it go to succession, but the idea really was to manage it for biodiversity. So I'm hoping that if we do get sponsorship for it, it can be managed with minimal visits, but like Nick said, just to wade out the invasive and maybe occasional reseeding or replanting.
Right, Juliet, thank you for sharing your insights with us as well on these 2 questions. We still have time for a couple more questions that our audience can ask. Please come forward, raise your hand, type down your questions. In the meanwhile, we had 2 follow-up questions from Heather Brooks asking about a follow-up question on biodiversity, asking what indicators were used in Liverpool regarding biodiversity, and also in Chicago, if this was monitored in terms of biodiversity. And the same Heather Brooks asks if the results of biodiversity monitoring be used to encourage further scale up of floating ecosystem project in the cities. So I'll leave you speakers with these questions. If you want, Juliet, you can start this time.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, in terms of the biodiversity, the freshwater island, sorry, that's not with the saltwater island, the big one. It's a lot harder for us to monitor the biodiversity for that, because obviously we've not invested in dinghies and boats and that. So we're very reliant on the contractor. So when the contractor makes the 3 times a year visit, we go out to the island and we undertake some plants that are there. And it was the contractor that was able to provide us the underwater footage to show the colonization. So we will be making assessments of both flora and fauna where we can identify them, but it's really limited to 3 opportunities in the year, and what we can supplement with binoculars from the shore side, really. So we do have a project monitoring officer, and she does stand on the shore with binoculars, and we do get some additional identifications that way. So it's not perfect. It would be great if we had the opportunity of a dinghy or ability to go out and undertake more regular monitoring. On the freshwater side, it's a little bit easier because it's a bit closer to shore. As I said before, the Friends carry out monitoring, and that supplements the monthly monitoring that our monitoring officer also carries out. So we'll have probably a more comprehensive picture over time for the small island than we will for the saltwater island. In terms of the diversity that's there already, for the saltwater island, we've used some natural species as well, things that are local and indigenous as well are on the island, as well as additional pollinators. So we will be able to look at what's best and what tends to thrive best in that location. So we'll hopefully get some information from that. In terms of scaling up, pre-COVID, there was some tentative talk about possibly scaling up the saltwater islands, and that was quite exciting, that we might be able to do more in the dock with private sponsorship, etc. I think post-COVID, we're going to have to just see how that pans out. But I think it's such a unique thing, and it's such an attraction in its own right. fairly optimistic that we'll be able to get people on board to keep the island there. The maintenance costs, they're not excessive really each year. I'm hoping it will become part of the city, a feature of the city, and that we can keep it. Those are the freshwater ones. The scaling up I talked about there, if it's successful in terms of dealing with blooms, then I think we've already started, to be fair. We've started looking at introducing some smaller floating islands into some of the other lakes where we've got issues, water quality issues as well. So I think that's probably it from Liverpool. So I don't know whether Nick's got comments to add as well.
Nick, please go ahead if you have some.
Yeah, so we have a couple different ways we do monitoring. So we have a partnership with the Shed Aquarium, and they have a kind of a citizen science group which goes out and monitors what they see. We actually just launched I honestly, frankly, I wish we had better data on this and more less anecdotal data other than just photos of things, something more systematic approach. We just launched a program to do bird monitoring, so people go out with binoculars and basically count the birds and identify the numbers and things like that. So I think over time we'll be able to get a much better picture, but anecdotally we definitely see a lot more wildlife in the area, a lot more birds, things like great blue herons and things like that, which hang out on the garden. So it's definitely from that sense it's increased. We also have a partnership with MWRD, which does electroshocking of fish. So they basically, it's kind of crazy. They have a boat that just shocks the water, and then all the fish float up, and then they count them, and then the fish then come back to life and do whatever they do. And so that also helps us get kind of data on the fish numbers and fish diversity in the area. But I'm hoping that over time we'll get a better picture of how this is, especially compared to a control of an area that doesn't have this stuff.
Great, Nick, thank you very much. I think we can accept a final set of questions to our speakers. We have a further one from J. Rod Luxton, but before I just put it to our speakers, I'd like to know if there's any additional one, so we can then close our session as we are over the time now.
Yeah, I guess I have a question for you, Juliet, on the do you see an increase in kind of recreation in any of these areas? Specifically, I guess in the saltwater area, is there a kind of how does that look in Liverpool?
We are actually monitoring because the project is looking at environmental, social, and economic aspects of each of the interventions. So we have some full cameras up, and we are carrying out when we're out of lockdown, we're doing surveys with people in the area, asking them about their perceptions of the green space as well as their health and well-being, etc. So that work's actually in progress now. So I don't actually have the data at the moment, but yeah, we are looking. I expect where the island is now, the idea for us as well is to we have quite a few cruise liners that come into the city, and they often go to the big shopping area in the docks, and if we can just tempt them along that little bit further to where the island is, the start of the green route, then take them up through some different parts of the city into some really interesting little areas. And there's lots of other green interventions like big living green walls and pollinator areas to see as well. So the idea is that it will actually become a little bit of a tourist attraction and a route in its own right as well.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I think it's cool, like especially like the areas that are just if they're just a little off the route, they kind of can take their own. They get their own kind of character, which is cool.
And I think having the island there, it fits with all the animation plans and strategies for that water area. The idea is to animate the whole of the waterfront. It's an important area for the city. We've got key conference centres and hotels and the historic docks. They're all down there. So this is a way of helping to rejuvenate, regenerate, and add that interest to some of those old docks as well. So yeah, I'm optimistic. Yeah, I'm hoping that it will become kind of a permanent feature in its own right, and it will attract people slightly further out along that area.
Yeah, I definitely think it will.
Great. Let me just pose you guys the final question that we have, and then we can close the session. So Jared Loxton just asked, what is the estimated life cycle of each one of the floating products that you have? Nick, if you want, you can start now.
Yeah, I believe the manufacturer estimates it at like 25 years, but the idea of it, that the point of it is that you start to replace the coconut coir with actual roots and biomass, and it becomes its own thing more indefinitely. It becomes a sustainable piece. So, you know, I think the original design was modeled off of some of these plants islands that basically have these plants that create this mass of roots, and then it just kind of goes on indefinitely and creates these large floating biomass islands. So that's really the kind of concept of it, is that the hardware is the way that it is, but eventually it gets taken over and kind of takes on a life of its own. Yeah.
Juliet.
And for us, I'd say that I think certainly in the saltwater, a little bit harsher with our weather and stuff, that I think we were talking in the region of about 15 years before you have to start to replace some components. We will be replacing actually the edge of ours, which is just currently coir, to stop all that lichen material falling off. We're going to replace that with timber edging. But yeah, about 15 years, I'd say. But we wouldn't want ours to probably self-accrete to the degree that Nick's talking about. Whilst that's good, I've got to remember that that's in a navigable channel and it's a used space. So yeah, we'd have to give that some thought, I suppose.
Great. I think that's all. For those that didn't have the opportunity to put their questions, please do not hesitate to contact us via email or any other means that via which you took notice of this webinar. I would like to thank to our panel of speakers, Juliet and Nick, for their great presentations and for having the opportunity, providing us the opportunity of sharing with us their knowledge on floating gardens and on their particular nature-based solutions. Thanks also to our audience and to all of them that made possible this webinar, including, of course, our colleagues from UNaLab and Connecting Nature. Again, we will be sharing on the project channels either the recording and the presentation of our speakers. So we will be in touch and soon organizing another webinar. I will let you know the details further onwards. So thank you very much for being here, and thank you very much for your presence. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.